guys, welcome back. Now, before we get into this week's video, I just want to make a quick correction for last week's video. Apparently, the Super Nintendo version of Hurricanes did sneak into the US, but only as a super limited release. I was actually looking at the Genesis version's info, which never did make the trip. So if you're just desperate to play some Hurricanes here in the US, be my guest. As for this week though, well, every now and again you find a game that just feels kinda off. Not that it's bad necessarily, but more that it's weird or gross or just something that seems like it completely missed the mark. Or as I'll explain at the end of the video, just deeply unsettled me. And this week's bunch of weirdos are some Super Nintendo games that just don't quite fit in anywhere. So let's get the bathroom humor rolling with the Super Nintendo's most disgusting game by far. Boogerman, a pick-and-flick adventure, is what happens when a developer decides that 10-year-old gross-out comedy is the future of video games. Now I need you to put yourself back in the early 90s for this one. A time when Ren and Stimpy dumping their organs onto the floor was considered peak kid comedy. And it wasn't just them. Just about every cartoon back then had characters screaming so hard that their skulls popped out, or some other kind of gross out gag that made your mom instantly change the channel when she walked by. That's the world that Boogerman walked into, and I see a lot of people ask just like how this game even happened. Like, was it tone deaf or did it completely miss the mark or something like that? And the answer is absolutely not. This was the mark. So don't think for a second that the developer Interplay wasn't convinced that this was gonna be a slam dunk.
For Sega Genesis.
But if you were just seeing Boogerman for the first time on this box cover, this ain't a good first impression. It just kinda looks like a bunch of clip art on a white background. And the back is just as big of a mess, with a wall of text that goes on forever, and the screenshots they used are awful. Like, you can barely even tell what's happening in them. So definitely 2 out of 5 stars for shelf appeal alone here. But who knows, maybe the rest of the game is as delightfully disgusting as what they were trying to sell us on. You play as mild-mannered guy Snotty Ragsdale, because of course you do, who transforms into the grossest superhero imaginable to save the world from something. His superpowers are about as far away from your typical Marvel hero as you can imagine, and more in line with a 40-year-old guy who just had too much Taco Bell. Which, I mean, that's more relatable to me, but might miss the mark for some people expecting more than just bionic farts. Now on the surface, Boogerman actually looks pretty decent. The characters are definitely on the chunkier side, but the animation is pretty good. Just about everything Boogerman does, for better or worse, has a ton of frames of animation. And the stages are all weird and gross in their own unique ways as well, filled with infected hair follicles and trees that honestly just kinda make me uncomfortable. There's definitely some Earthworm Jim energy here as well, which makes sense since a few of the same folks worked on both games. But where Earthworm Jim was weird and fun, Boogerman just kinda coasts on its gimmick. And once you get into the game, it's clear just how hard they leaned into that gimmick. Boogerman is basically a walking biohazard, loaded with enough mucus and gas to fuel 3 different attacks. First up, of course, you got your Booger Flick, where you literally just fling a booger straight ahead. Then you've got your burp attack that you can actually charge up for more damage if you want to. And finally, a fart attack that hits enemies behind you. And yes, you can even use your farts to fly around the stage if you want to. And all that sounds fun enough, but unfortunately there's a catch. Every single one of those attacks runs on its own item pickup, so after a while it's just kind of a pain to manage, especially when you can just jump on enemies instead and not worry about which bodily function you can use in the heat of the moment. And even if all that was a blast to use, and don't get me wrong, it can be fun, it only takes you so far because the rest of the gameplay here is it's mostly average. At its core, this is just a basic 2D platformer with a thick layer of gross slapped on top. The stages themselves are pretty straightforward, even if they do look like they go all over the place, and I guess they kinda do, but it's more about exploration than actual complexity. There's stuff scattered everywhere, mostly because, like I mentioned, you need different power-ups for almost everything that Boogerman can do. So if you feel like piddling around, there's plenty to piddle around in. But if you'd rather just stick to the main path, it's usually clear enough where you're supposed to go. And since the levels aren't very long anyway, exploring isn't a bad way to kill a few minutes. And for a game that's based around boogers and farts, it's not that bad at all. But if you really want to pick at Boogerman, it's got two problems holding it back. First, Boogerman can only take 2 hits before he melts away into goo. Combine that with a chunky sprite and hit detection that's loose at best, and it's way too easy to die in this game. And that leads right into the second issue. The camera always feels like it's just a little bit too far behind where it should be. So you end up doing that awkward start and stop routine, where you inch forward just a little bit to make sure an enemy isn't about to pop up in your face. It's like the game hands you all these fun abilities to mess around with, but then forces you to play like you're too scared to actually use them. And as for the humor, that's either a plus or a deal breaker. It depends entirely on how you feel about nose picking and fart jokes. It's very 1994. But if you're looking for, I don't know, elevated fart humor or something like that, this ain't gonna be it. That said though, at least the game's honest about what it is. And if you're playing something called Boogerman and not even slightly amused, that might be more on you than the game. At the end of the day though, Boogerman is one of those games that could have only existed when it did. It's a full-on time capsule of what passed for comedy in the mid-90s. It's not gonna be for everyone, obviously, but if it looks like this is your kind of thing, you're at least getting a functional game underneath all the snot. And believe it or not, there were big plans for Boogerman, including an entire cartoon series, but I guess the game just didn't hit like Interplay wanted. And since then, he's been relegated to Clay Fighter cameos and the occasional YouTube appearance thanks to content creators digging up weird nostalgia bait, present company included. But all joking aside, Boogerman's not that bad. Just know that once you flick past all the novelty, there's not much left to pick at. Captain Novolin for the Super Nintendo may have started off with good intentions, but what we ended up with is so bad that we almost need a separate medication prescription just to play it. Okay, so I'm gonna need you guys to bear with me for a second, because this one kind of fascinates me. Captain Novolin wasn't just some random game trying to sneak in a little edutainment into your cartridge collection. It was actually created by people with a background in the medical field, specifically in developing healthcare software. The publisher, Raya Systems, or whatever they're called, put out 4 health-themed games for the Super Nintendo. There was of course Captain Novolin for diabetes awareness, Rex Ronan, experimental surgeon to promote anti-smoking, Bronchi the Brontosaurus to teach kids about asthma, and finally Packy and Marlin, another diabetes-focused title that leaned a little bit more into co-op play and storytelling. So, yeah, this wasn't just some one-off or something like that. It was a whole thing. And as weird and clunky as these games were, I gotta admit, part of me respects how hard they tried to use video games to actually teach kids about managing real health conditions. But good intentions aside, what we ended up with is still one of the weirdest and worst video games of all time. Captain Novolin hit the Super Nintendo back in 1992 with box art so unappealing that it looked like it didn't even care if you played it. And the back of the box is just a full-on fever dream. You got your basic game description over here, but then it hits you with a glowing recommendation from the Juvenile Diabetes Foundation. And then the screenshots over here, there's a blood glucose meter, insulin shots, and whatever this thing is. I can't say that it's boring, and honestly, I probably would have rented it out of pure curiosity. But let's see if what's inside the box is just as strange. Okay, so I'm gonna try to explain this. First off, I want to be clear. I don't have diabetes, at least yet anyway, so I can't speak on what it's like to live with it. Nothing I say here is meant to be a slight towards people that do, though. I know it's a serious condition that affects millions of people, young and old. That said, though, Captain Novolin is not a good game, and it does a pretty bad job of explaining anything meaningful about the disorder. You of course play as Captain Novolin, a superhero who just happens to have type 1 diabetes. Your mission is to save the mayor of Pineville after he's kidnapped by a gang of alien junk food monsters. Which, for a diabetic superhero, this is pretty much your nightmare scenario. And true to form, you can't touch the junk food enemies, because every time you do, you take damage. It's meant to teach kids with diabetes to avoid sugary snacks. But weirdly, the game isn't as focused on what you can't eat as what you can. Each level kicks off with this deep lore Star Wars character explaining which foods you're allowed to eat at what time of the day. You then go about collecting those items throughout the level, but not too many, because if you overeat, then your blood sugar spikes and you collapse. And while you're trying to follow that diet plan, you're also dodging anthropomorphic donuts, evil soda bottles, and candy bars that run at you like you owe them money. And the only thing that you can do is jump over them, or you can press down while you're in the air to stomp on them, but that's so awkward to pull off that you'll usually end up taking a hit before they do. There are also the occasional pop-up factoids about diabetes, followed by quiz questions that can earn you extra points if you answer correctly. And you'll also bump into characters who'll help you out with some diabetic pro tips. And all this sounds pretty good in theory, but in practice it is just a complete mess. Not because the information is wrong, but because it's buried inside an absolutely atrocious game. And this one's honestly one of the worst I've played in a while. For a game so simple that it could be played on a Tiger Electronics handheld, it somehow plays horribly. Like I said, all you can really do in this game is jump, and they somehow gave this guy the worst jump I've ever seen in a platformer. He floats up and down like he's stuck in slow motion, and the enemies are so massive that you'll constantly get hit unless you've just memorized the entire level. It really feels like the game's just trying to punish you for even playing it. And whatever good intentions it started with are completely gone by the time you finish a single level, because you won't want to play another one. Visually, it's hilariously bad, and depending on how broken your brain is, that might actually be the best part about the whole game. Captain Novolin himself looks like he stepped out of a bad early 90s safety PSA, like he's one sentence away from telling you to buckle your seatbelt while saying no to drugs. The enemy designs are so bad that they could have been on a PowerPoint presentation about break room etiquette. And the rest of the game just looks like a mashup of bad digitized wingdings and rejected Mario Paint doodles. And the weird thing is, this was made by Sculptured Software, a developer that had already put out actual games before this. But here, everything just looks like it was slapped together in between their other games. To me though, the game's biggest problem is just how badly it fails at communicating its entire point. Doctors just pop out of nowhere tossing out information at you, and you're expected to check your blood glucose levels and match them with an insulin dose, but the game never actually explains how any of this works. It even starts with a code that your real-life doctor is supposed to give you based on your actual insulin dosage, which sounds like a good idea, except for the game never tells you the sugar content of any of the food items in the game, and you can only check your glucose levels at certain points during a level. You can even collapse before the stage is over if your levels get too high or too low. So you're just basically guessing your way through something that's supposed to teach you how to manage a serious medical condition. Now look, I get what they were going for. This was meant to teach kids with diabetes how to manage their condition at a time when there was basically zero representation for that in video games, and I think that's genuinely commendable. But the problem is that they wrapped it in a game that doesn't really work, not as a teaching tool and definitely not as a fun video game. To their credit, the group that funded the game gave away 10,000 copies of the game to hospitals and doctors' offices to help educate newly diagnosed kids. The game even came with a sign-out sleeve for patients to take home with them. And I think that's really cool, and if it stopped right there, I'd probably feel bad about making fun of it. But this game hits store shelves for you to use real money to buy. And once you do that, you kinda just open yourself up to a little bit more scrutiny. I don't know, man. Captain Novolin just kind of feels more like a misguided homework assignment than a video game. Unless you're just collecting weird licensed Super Nintendo titles, or you've got a morbid curiosity for health-based superheroes, this one's probably best left in the doctor's office. Harley's Humongous adventure may not be a giant of the genre, but its small-scale charm is hard to miss. For those of you that might have forgotten, back in the early 90s, Visual Concepts, the developer of this game, pretty much decided that every game they made was going to revolve around digitized claymation figures slapped into them. Think Mortal Kombat, but made of clay. It was a hit-or-miss experiment, with their biggest success by far being Clay Fighter. Again, think Mortal Kombat, but you get the idea. They also put out Claymates, which leaned more into traditional platforming but added a fun shape-shifting mechanic in to keep things interesting. But the very first Clay game that they ever released was Harley's Humongous Adventure, a game that doesn't get talked about nearly as much but maybe deserves a little bit more attention. Harley's Humongous Adventure hit shelves back in 1993 with some really good box art. Like this stuff right here, this is what instantly gets your attention whenever you see it on the shelf. And just look at the back of this box. This right here is how you do it. Tons of screenshots showing off all kinds of neat stuff. Weird enemy cutouts just littered all over the place, and just enough text to sell you on the whole damn thing. Honestly, for the game's sake, I hope what's inside of it is at least half as good as this box made it look to kids. You play as Harley, a kid genius who accidentally shrinks himself down to Honey, I Shrunk the Kid's size and has to now navigate a giant world full of everyday objects and mutant pests. The goal in each stage is simple. You just track down a missing part of your shrinker machine so you can eventually return to normal size. Most of the stages are sprawling little obstacle courses with multiple paths and plenty of dead ends. And if you're not into that big open-ended platform style of stage, I'm gonna tell you right now, you're probably not gonna like this game. To be fair, exploring usually at least throws you a bone with some kind of pickup, but not every path goes somewhere meaningful. If you're just trying to get to the end of the stage, expect a fair amount of trial and error getting there sometimes. There's at least a little bit of variety though, like one stage where you blast your way forward in a toy tank, and of course the obligatory swimming level where you're just constantly running out of air. But for the most part, I can't say that I'm a huge fan of the level design here. It's not anything against the game, it's just not my kind of thing. I prefer my platformers to be a little less exploration heavy, or at least make the main path a bit more obvious. Kinda like how Boogerman did it. And I cannot believe that I'm actually using Boogerman as a positive example. But at least the game gives you a ton of stuff to mess around with in those stages. Your weapons are exactly what you'd expect from a game where you're running around at toy soldier scale. You've got nails that act like arrows, green marbles that can bounce and ricochet all over the place, and a firecracker that hits pretty hard but takes so long to explode that it's basically useless unless enemies just kinda stand around and wait for it. You also have a rocket pack that you can use whenever you find rocket fuel, and that makes exploring the levels actually way more fun. And there's even more junk to play with. Tacks, suction cups, parachutes. The game definitely doesn't short you on gadgets here. And it is fun making your way through the stages with them. Even if I'm not the biggest fan of the level design, I still had a good time experimenting with all the weird stuff that you come across. And for the most part, doing it all feels pretty good. Harley moves fast enough, and his jump, while it is locked to just one height, it works well enough for most of the platforming that the game throws at you. Now, I've seen some people point to Harley's fixed jump as the big problem with this game, but honestly, that doesn't really bother me. What does drive me crazy though is just how long it takes for him to turn around. There's like a solid second delay from whenever you press the opposite direction to when Harley actually faces that way. And in a game where enemies are just trying to charge straight at you from both sides all of the time, that delay gets frustrating really fast. And if you're expecting me to gush about these clay graphics, well, I'm not this time. And maybe this was because it was their first attempt at the whole clay thing, but this is probably Visual Concepts' least impressive looking one out of the whole bunch. Aside from a few enemies, you'd be hard-pressed to even tell that these are supposed to be clay figures. I don't think the game looks bad. I mean, there's a decent amount of visual variety all over the place, but it never really leans into the clay aesthetic like Clay Fighter or even Claymates did. Aside from that, though, I don't really have too many bad things to say about Harley's Humongous Adventure. This was another case of Visual Concepts really trying to make the whole claymation thing happen, but I don't think this one ever grabbed kids' attention that the way Clay Fighter did, or even Claymates for that matter. But Harley's Humongous Adventure might actually be one of their better games. If it weren't for a few control issues, mainly that frustrating turn delay, I think this could have been a really good game. It's definitely weird and it's fun to play with, plus it just has enough personality to make it memorable. So if you've ever wanted to play the Super Nintendo version of Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, I think you could do a lot worse than Harley's Humongous Adventure. Daze Before Christmas is one of the very few Super Nintendo games based around the holiday season, and it might just be one of the weirdest. So do you guys like Christmas games? Or maybe I should ask, do you like the idea of Christmas games? Because honestly, there haven't been too many that's ever been worth playing. And on the Super Nintendo, the only ones that I really remember were the Home Alone games, and neither of those should ever be played by anyone. But what if I told you that there's a halfway decent Christmas game that you probably never even heard of? This one barely got released in the territories that it did make it to, and the US Super Nintendo release was completely canned before it could even cross the ocean. So today we're going to be taking a look at the PAL version to see if this Santa is worth a little bit of jingle. Days Before Christmas fell off Santa's sleigh and down your chimney back in 1994 with some surprisingly decent box art here. Flip the box over and it's all in German, and I can't actually read this. But just going by the screenshots, I mean, it doesn't look half bad. The graphics look decent, the stages are colorful, and I'm pretty sure this one right here isn't even in the game. Still, it gives off the vibe of a quirky little Santa platformer that you could either get into the holiday spirit with, or at least laugh at for a bit just because of how weird it is. You take control of a surprisingly nimble Santa Claus who can run and jump just about as well as any of the more athletic 16-bit mascots, despite rocking the full beard and dad bod combo. Running around with Santa actually feels pretty good, and his main attack is just a straight shot of cold air that takes out enemies in one hit, assuming that you can fire it off fast enough. And that's mainly because Santa is locked in the center of the screen at pretty much all times, making this yet another game in this video where you're creeping ahead at times. Combine that with his slightly delayed attack and you'll be taking a few hits before you even realize what's happening sometimes. Most of the item pickups are pretty basic. You'll find some hidden elves, extra hats, or even checkpoints represented as jingle bells. But occasionally you'll find a cup of tea laying around. Drink it and Santa transforms into his angry alter ego, Anti-Claus. And yes, that is his actual name in the manual, I didn't just make that up. Anti-Claus ditches the whiff of cold air in favor of full-on chaos, swinging a sack of toys like a madman. It's basically the version of Santa that you'd expect to see chain smoking behind an Arby's on a late-night Christmas run. And while it is hilarious the first few times you see it, the transformation doesn't really transform the gameplay that much. But I mean, at least watching Santa lose it and go full Krampus isn't the worst thing that a Christmas game could offer. The level design is pretty much what you'd expect from a mid-tier 16-bit platformer. You jump around, you reach the star at the end, and that's pretty much it. But a lot of the platforming relies on blind jumps or barely visible platforms. You're probably gonna die more from bad jumps than anything that the enemies throw at you. You also get a few side-scrolling shooter segments where you dodge obstacles and toss presents into chimneys, which honestly just kind of feels like the one thing in the game that actually fits the whole Santa theme. And at least most of the stages look completely different from every other one, almost too different sometimes. Some of them feel like they were pulled from completely unrelated games. One minute you're running through a snowy toy shop, which that's what you should be doing in this game, and the next you're in an ancient temple that just kind of looks like it was ripped out of Aladdin or something. And that same mismatch shows up in the enemies too. A lot of them look fine on their own, like the mice and scattered toys, but then you've got these weird snowmen with no shading on them, or random birds just flying around in a cave like they took a wrong turn or something. It's like someone dumped 5 different games into a blender, and this is what came out. And maybe this is just like a European thing with Santa? I mean, does he have crazy adventures while just being really mad when he drinks tea over there? Well, let me know in the comments if this is just a cultural thing that I haven't seen before with Santa. But regardless of all that, at least the game's really easy. Most enemies die in one hit and only pose a threat if you accidentally walk into them. Bosses are present, but only have one attack that's usually incredibly easy to avoid. The first boss can't even hit you unless you just jump directly into his snowball. I mean, it's clear that this game was made for a younger audience, so the lower difficulty isn't that surprising, and honestly it just makes for a pretty breezy playthrough. In the end, Days Before Christmas isn't some sort of lost classic or anything like that, but it's got a weird offbeat charm that kinda works. And for what it is, it's a surprisingly playable little oddity, especially when you compare it to some of those other holiday cash-ins from the 90s. So if you're looking for a quick, easy Super Nintendo game with an aggressive Santa and a look that's all over the place, Days Before Christmas might be worth checking out. Just don't expect a Christmas miracle. I think that's gonna do it for me this week. Now, before anyone says Harley's Humongous Adventure doesn't belong in this list, well, yeah, you're probably right, but that one's more of a personal thing for me. See, I was actually terrified of anything claymation as a kid. Stuff like that or the California Raisins just deeply unsettled me, and I have no idea why. That's why I just never touched any of those clay games back then. I wouldn't have been able to sleep for a week if I did. Anyway, I need you guys to let me know what cursed or just plain weird Super Nintendo games that I missed this week. I know we just did a weird beat-em-up video, but I really like covering this kind of stuff. It makes these videos more fun for me anyway. And if it was fun for you, then do me a favor and just throw your whole damn body at the like button, and maybe even hit subscribe if you want some more weird-ass games in the future. But that's gonna do it for me this week, guys. Check back next week for some more weird crap to talk about. But until then, thanks for watching.